Azure Cosmos DB, what is it? Why do you want to use it? And how are you going to make it work for you? I've got all the answers coming up now. Hello everybody, my name is Adam Gordon, entertainer here at IT Pro TV, back with another exciting What is Azure serial episode. In this episode, we're going to answer our famous questions. What is the Azure service that we're focusing on? In this case, Azure Cosmos DB. Why is it important? Why do you want to use it? And ultimately, how can you set up and deploy it? We're going to begin by talking about what is Azure Cosmos DB. Most of you have probably come across a database as you've been working with information, whether it is an Excel spreadsheet, which, believe it or not, can be a type of database, linking information across different tabs in the Excel spreadsheet. Similar concept to a database, although it's much smaller and self-contained. You might have certainly come across something like Microsoft Access, slightly bigger version of databases, relational in nature, having a design associated with how we use, define, and ultimately query data, probably one of the most common databases that most of us start out finding out about, and maybe the really big version of that at scale, Microsoft SQL, the large enterprise scale database that, again, most of us probably come across at some point when we're working or interacting with information. But the reality is all databases are not created equal. The Azure Cosmos DB database is all about scale, massive scale. Imagine taking that Microsoft Access or Microsoft SQL database and stretching it as far as you possibly can, and then stretching it even more and even more, wrapping it around the entire Earth. And then imagine that you can put so much information into that database, the biggest number you can imagine, multiply that by the biggest number, and then take that number and multiply it by that number again. And you'd still have room left over. That's what Azure Cosmos DB represents. Massive data management at scale in the cloud with guaranteed uptime. Microsoft takes away all the complexity from us and allows us as customers, our users of the database, to be able to quickly connect to one or more elements that use it and then see those elements at scale anywhere in the world. But it does so with 99.999% uptime, 5.9 uptime, massive amounts of availability, at scale globally, multiple regions anywhere in the world, and does so not using traditional database models, the model we think about as a relational database with tables, the Access, the SQL database I discussed, but rather allows us to be able to do this using no SQL databases. The idea behind it is we don't have the schemas, the data definitions that are complex. We don't have to worry about the relationships in the tables and maintaining and grooming all that data. All the complexity goes away. It's available to us. Microsoft manages it. And as a result of that, we have a lot more flexibility to use large amounts of data and to do so anywhere in the world and also securely. So when we think about what Azure Cosmos DB is, it checks off all those boxes for us. Let's talk about why it's important to use for just a moment. When we think about our users, over here, for instance, and the fact that they need to be able to connect to this data that we're storing in the Azure Cosmos DB, and they want to be able to do that, connect to it, consume it, interact with it, in order to understand the value of that data and tell compelling stories, maybe to stakeholders, to business decision makers, maybe as a customer, they just want to understand more about their information, their order, and their experience with your company. So let's take that journey with them and understand why this is important. The app users are going to be outside of Azure somewhere, off on the internet, and they're going to come through our Azure Traffic Manager, interact with our web front end. Imagine this is you trying to get something and buy something from a web page using that particular e-commerce functionality we're all familiar with, the Amazon model of the world. And so our journey begins by bringing those users and their traffic through a traffic management device. Think of it as a gateway, right, that routes traffic and sends it to the easiest and most available and most readily usable portion of that application. And that traffic winds up here, and then those users and that traffic have to make this journey over to the Azure Cosmos DB, to the database, to interact, make that order, ask a question, and understand how to get that information back. This application sends this data over to any one of several regions where this data is maintained by Microsoft on our behalf, and does so quickly, at scale, seamlessly. So as the customer, I don't have to worry about it. As the user, I don't have to worry about it. Microsoft does all this for us. We like the simplicity and the ease of use. These regions are interconnected. They communicate with each other, and we can kind of draw a line around these to represent the fact they're all part of the same group. If I connect in region B, it's the same as if I connect in region A or C. My data is going to be available. I'm going to be able to access it as a customer. I'm going to be able to interact with it, get the answers that I need. And finally, we can do this securely using Azure Key Vault to maintain the integrity and the confidentiality of our data. We can look users up in the Azure Active Directory, understanding that we can validate who they are and what they're there to do. And we can get Azure App Insights as part of this solution, telling us and performance-wise explaining to us as the customer exactly how well we're doing at taking care of these users' requests, how quickly, how thoroughly, and as a result of that, can we make changes and optimize that if necessary? All of this is going to be able to be brought to bear to make this experience for our users the best one possible. That's really the main reason why we want to be able to use Azure Cosmos DB. How we're going to do that is going to require me to go and show you how we can deploy this, and you're going to join me for that coming up now. So we're going to talk about how we can actually deploy an Azure Cosmos DB instance. We're in the Azure portal. I'm going to zoom in just a second to show you where we are. We're using our navigation quick pick list. I'm going to choose the Azure Cosmos DB option. You'll see the pop-out card there showing us what it is. If you don't see Azure Cosmos DB in this list, you can add and remove elements, so it may look different for you when you go to take a look. Let's just zoom in real quick so you can see that up close. You can use the all services and dashboard elements up above to search. You can actually also come right up here, use create a resource, or use the search bar and type in Azure Cosmos DB in order to find it. So it's really easy to get to. We're going to click on it. We're going to bring up the Azure Cosmos DB area where we would see any and all of the active instances. Notice there's nothing there right now, but what we're going to do is come over here. We're going to choose our add option, and we're going to begin to use the wizard in order to create this instance. So we'll click there. We'll give it just a second. We're going to have several different things we have to provide information for. Think of them as questions you have to answer on several tabs. We're not going to walk through all of them. I'm going to stop for a moment here and there, call out a couple of things that are of interest to you. If you want to see a full walkthrough and understand all of the options you have, and the understanding is really important to make good decisions, you can join me over at IT Pro TV, where we discuss all of the Azure services and the ways to deploy them in more depth. And you could see all the different kind of training we have available. I actually talk about Azure Cosmos DB in a couple of different courses there, and you could certainly take advantage of that if you choose to. All right, let's jump in. Let's take a look at the basics. What we're going to do is just scroll down for just a moment. And the first thing we need to do is pick a place where we want our Azure Cosmos DB instance to live. We call that a resource group. Think of it as a container where we can put all of our stuff, and it's uniquely dedicated to that particular amount of stuff, whatever we're collecting and using. I'm going to use a pre-existing one by pulling down that list and choosing one I've already created, but I can also create a new one right from here if I choose to. So I'm going to use the Cosmos DB resource group that I've already created. And then we have to specify our instance details. And in the instance details area, we need to give our instance, the Azure Cosmos DB installation we're about to create, a name. I'm going to call that my Courtney C for Cosmos, DB for Cosmos DB. Courtney is the name of our producer. It's behind the camera for us on this episode. Hi, Courtney. And we're going to go ahead and choose our API. Our API is going to be, as you can see, our list of all the different models and ways in which we can deploy Azure Cosmos DB. We can use it with MongoDB, Cassandra, all sorts of different options, really driven by the business need that you're going to address. I can choose any one of these, and depending on which one I choose, I have slightly different options. You'll see the Azure Cosmos DB for Mongo changes some of the things I have to provide. If I choose Core SQL, some of the things change. So we'll use Core SQL, but you make the appropriate choice. And then down below, I've got some options here about whether or not I want a certain kind of account, production, non-production, whether I want to have those geo-redundancy capabilities I showed you on the Lightboard, those different regions where I can have these instances of Cosmos DB running to give me that global availability. So we make our choices here as necessary. And then what we want to do is go to our networking area. We want to be able to choose what kind of network connections we want to make available for working with the Azure Cosmos DB instance. Do I want to have public IP addresses that are available so people outside, as we saw in our diagram on the Lightboard, can connect in? Do I want only private networks available for me, for users inside the Azure cloud, inside our corporation, but not external? Or do I want to blend? I make different choices, again, depending on the reasons why I'm deploying this and how I want to use it. We'll leave our default in place. We're going to take a look at our backup policy. This allows us to make sure that we have the information that's in our database or in the instances of the database all backed up, copied, safe, secure. If anything were to go wrong, we had to restore it, we can go to that backup and we can have Microsoft restore that information for us. So we make some choices here, again, as needed. And then what we want to do is we want to go over to our encryption area, the last major area we want to focus on. And for encryption, we have to make a very important choice. Whether we, as the customer, the person who's going to ultimately own, or the organization that's ultimately going to own this instance of Azure Cosmos DB, do we want Microsoft to manage encryption and secure keys for encryption on our behalf? Service Managed Key gives us that option. Again, remember, Microsoft's managing everything already. We want to probably let them do that part as well. But if we have a need to use customer managed keys, we can choose that. And then we actually decide what kind of keys we're going to use, how big they're going to be, how long they stick around, and most importantly, how we're going to store them securely using the Azure Key Vault. And you can check out our episode on the Azure Key Vault in the What is Azure serial if you want to learn more about that service as well. So we make our choices here. Once we're done, we click through our last area, tags or metadata. You can use them or not. We click Review and Create. Once we get our validation success telling us we're ready to go, we would go ahead and we would choose Create right down here at the bottom. It will take several minutes to create the instance, so be patient with it while you're waiting. Again, if you want to see how this is done end to end, you can check me out over at IT Pro TV and all of the other edutainers that talk about Azure, showing you all the different ways in which you can use Azure services most efficiently across your organization. I'll be back with more episodes in our What is Azure serial, but until I have another cool feature to talk about with you, I'll wish you happy Azuring, and I'll see you soon.